I was at the lowest point in my life. I had dropped out of college, found myself struggling with depression, abusing substances, even thought of taking my own life. And so the central mission of my life has been to advocate for poor people in public housing. And at age 24, I took the leap of faith, and in a race of about 10 candidates, I won my first campaign.
Raised by a single mother in the Bronx, Ritchie relied on public housing as a kid and has largely run his campaigns on improving social services for those in need. He's a self-described center Democrat who is against the actions of the current administration, but believes anti-Trump isn't enough of a platform for Democrats.
Like Donald Trump did to politics what Vince McMahon did to wrestling. He transformed it into a form of entertainment. For Democrats to stand against Trump, we have to stand for something. We should have an affirmative agenda for making America more affordable to more Americans.
Were you surprised that President Trump was able to negotiate a ceasefire deal?
Even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Welcome to another Lunch with Jamie. I am beyond excited to have Representative Richie Torres, who needs no introduction and has been doing some extraordinary work, is in many ways truly one of a kind in Congress. I hate making those proclamations, but I think he actually may be. But I'll let him answer some questions and we can make that decision. There's so much going on in Congress that I really just want to talk to him more about policy and what's going on, but I also want to take a step back and get to know him a little bit. So, Congressman Torres, thank you very much for joining us and participating in the Lunch with Jamie community.
Honored to be here.
You know, right now you should be out work in D.C. We're obviously dealing with a shutdown. Is there one thing that you feel is the most misunderstood element of the shutdown?
I don't know if it's misunderstood, but it's obviously I feel like our politics has become performative, but the stakes of the shutdown are substantive. Like I do feel my side, the Democratic Party, has a legitimate concern that if those enhanced premium tax credits are allowed to expire, up to 24 million people in the ACA marketplace could see their premiums more than double, rising by an average of 114%. 4 million Americans will lose health care, and when you combine it with the Medicaid cuts, it's a total of 14 million. And hospitals everywhere in America, including in the Bronx, where healthcare is 25% of the economy, hospitals everywhere are going to absorb about $30 billion in losses. And keep in mind, the healthcare provider is often the largest employer in much of urban and rural America. And one of the cruel ironies is that 75% of the beneficiaries of the tax credits actually live in red states that Donald Trump won. There's a sense in which blue state representatives are fighting primarily for tax credits that are heavily skewed toward red states. So I feel like that is a legitimate grievance, and both sides are dug in, but I wish both sides could come to the table and broker a compromise that reopens the government and that ensures that healthcare remains affordable to 24 million Americans. And keep in mind that New York has the most at stake, because these enhanced premium tax credits are the main funding source for a program known as the Essential Plan. So there are moderate income households whose incomes are too high to qualify for Medicaid, but too low to qualify or to afford the ACA marketplace. And so that intermediate plan, the Essential Plan in New York, is meant to capture those families. It captures about 1.7 million in New Yorkers. And again, if we lose the enhanced premium tax credits, and when you combine it with the so-called big beautiful bill, that will create around $10 billion hole in the New York State budget, which will affect everything in New York. That's a massive loss of revenue for the state of New York.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
You highlighted something that I think is at the core of one of the issues today for Democrats, which is the fact that these healthcare subsidies will ultimately hurt red states more than they will in many even in blue states. And that seems to be a common theme for a lot of the things Democrats are fighting for and what Trump stands for. Why do you think those messages are not resonating with a large number of voters?
It's hard to know whether it's resonating, right? But we feel affordability is the central concern. that resonates the most with Americans. And, there are issues on which Democrats have more credibility than Republicans, and there are issues on which Republicans have more credibility than Democrats, right? Republicans historically have had an advantage on the issue of immigration, but we have an advantage on the issue of healthcare. And healthcare may be the central cost that weighs most heavily on American households. It's the leading cause of bankruptcies in America. It's a massive burden on both small business and small households. So we feel it's the right issue on which to fight for the American people. I think the challenge here is if Republicans were cutting Social Security or Medicare, you would see it and feel it clearly, and the public would react with outrage. Whereas with the enhanced premium tax credits, it's much more complicated because there are millions of people, tens of millions of people who are benefiting from those tax credits without actually knowing.
Do you see a light at the end of the tunnel right now when it comes to the shutdown?
I feel November's a turning point. I think once more people receive a critical mass of Americans receive notices about premium shocks, and once they're applying for their, re-enrolling through open enrollment, that's going to put enormous pressure for there to be a deal. So I see November as the turning point.
I hope so. I can't remember. Were you supportive of the government shutdown in the spring, or were you? Where was your mind, and would you?
Every House Democrat, with one possible exception, voted against the Republican CR. That's my recollection.
On a macro level, what do you think the Democrats are kind of still doing wrong today, if they are? I mean, what do you think's missing right now from the conversation?
I think here's the danger that we have to keep in mind. It's not enough for Democrats to stand against Trump. We have to stand for something. We should have an affirmative agenda for making America more affordable to more Americans. And I would apply the same criticism within the Democratic Party. It's not enough for the center left to stand against the far left. You have to actually stand for something. If you have a generation of young Americans who are struggling to cope with the crushing cost of housing and higher education and healthcare, then you need to offer a policy platform that speaks to those legitimate anxieties about the affordability crisis. It's not enough to mock ideas with which you disagree. You actually have to have an affirmative vision. And that's what's lacking, because it feels like everything is spiraling out of control, whether it's healthcare, housing, higher education, insurance, utilities here in New York, elsewhere in the country. Like, people are suffocating. One of the most troubling statistics I saw in the 1950s, around 50% of 30-year-olds were both married and homeowners. Today, that number is closer to 10%. Like, the very foundations for the American dream, marriage, family formation, home ownership, are collapsing under the weight of the affordability crisis. Like, for me, the greatest threat to democracy, apart from Donald Trump, is the affordability crisis, because it will shake confidence in the very system.
And do you think that message is not being expressed strong enough by the Democrats? Because I think, like, ultimately, I think what you just said is what I see as a Democrat and what a Democrat stands for, but that for some reason it's just not connecting. And is it the messengers? Is it the way we're messaging? I mean, you talked about the podcast election. I mean, there's obviously a lot of things you can kind of point to, but are there some very specific things that you think Democrats need to be doing that they aren't? Do we need the messengers to get out there in a more vocal and bigger way?
It's all of the above. Like, the message matters, the messenger matters. We need a new generation of leadership, because Congress historically has been a gerontocracy, and the media matters. Think about the mayor's race, right? For me, the outcome of the mayor's race, is as much a media revolution as it is an ideological revolution, right? Zoran Mamdani won partly on the strength of vertical video campaigning on social media. Cuomo's campaign spent tens of millions of dollars on television ads, and I did not see a single ad because I do not watch traditional network television. And I'm hardly unique in my generation. And so we have to meet voters where they are. We have to recognize there's a brave new world of alternative media, and we either engage with it, we adapt, or we become extinct. Like politics as we know it, the rules of politics are being radically rewritten in real time.
You touched on the mayor's race. Part of, I know you came out to support Governor Cuomo. You mentioned working for Dan Doctoroff. I can't imagine Dan would be a Mondami fan. What's your take on where the race is now? And I guess have you spent time with Mondami yet? What are some of your thoughts?
I mean, it's a law of nature that the Democratic nominee almost invariably wins the general election. So I'm operating under the assumption that he's likely to be the mayor of New York. It's no secret that we have profound differences of opinion on issues like Israel, strongly felt differences of opinion. But I'm in a world where you have to form working relationships with people with whom you disagree, with people whose beliefs deeply offend you. I do it every day. I have Republican colleagues who deny my very equality and humanity as a gay person. And I have no choice but to broker compromises with them that, move the ball forward and that make governing possible. And so on issues on which I disagree with Mamdani, I will support him, but on issues on which I disagree with him, I'll hold his feet to the fire as I would any mayor. And that's the standard that I apply to everyone.
I was just in New York and I watched the mayor debate from start to finish. Are you surprised that ultimately these are sort of the candidates that we're looking at in the New York mayor?
I feel the center of American politics has atrophied from neglect. There's been a lack of bench building, a lack of investment in the next generation of leadership. Like the energy's on the left. That's just a fact. If the best candidates you can offer are Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo, then you have a problem.
The interesting thing is, and this is indirect, not directly related to what you said, but I actually think the Democratic bench right now is really exciting. And actually, I would say a lot of them, and time will tell, do wind up more in the center, per se. Wes Moore, Josh Shapiro, Gretchen Whitmer.
I was referencing local.
No, that's what I'm saying. No, I know, but it's interesting. But as so as I think about that, I actually I'm not thinking about local politics as much. And it's interesting if on a national level, for whatever reason, maybe it's a reaction to the Secretary Clinton.
I feel like we pay far too much attention to national politics at the expense of state. I feel state and local is actually more important. Mayors and governors have a far greater impact in your lives than members of Congress. It's just a fact.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I do think, that's one of the things that's come out of the Trump presidency is, and we talk about this and some of the guests I've had, Anderson Clayton, who's the chair of the North Carolina Democratic Party, is someone I've become a big fan of, who have had conversations with and gotten me and focused on local races, and whether it's attorney general races like Jeff Jackson in North Carolina or Dom Davis or, and races you would never years ago, people wouldn't be talking about these races. And I think people are catching on to that, but one step lower in the sense of not on a national level, that may be kind of still missing. It's interesting you bring that up.
Yeah, and I feel like the Democratic Party is playing catch up. I once heard an observation from Ross Barkan, whose politics are different from mine, but I thought it was exactly right. He said the left owns culture, but the right owns power. By which I think he meant, the left is most powerful in media, higher education, and cultural institutions, but the right controls the courts. It controls state legislatures. And that did not happen by accident. It is the product of decades and decades of organizing. Dogged organizing.
Yeah, it feels like the Democrats have had their eye off the ball for a while, and we're now seeing the ramifications of it. you brought up Lyndon Johnson earlier, and I don't know, I'm sure you haven't had time to listen to the Daily yet today. But he talked about it was all about the sort of systematic attempt to dismantle DEI, but also civil rights overall, and how
Yeah.
one of the first things Trump did was to you know was to eliminate the executive order that Trump that Lyndon Johnson had signed about discriminating based on race. Um, I mean, how concerned are you about this sort of fight right now, and what are things that you're doing, and what can people be doing to kind of fight back about this attack on kind of civil rights?
Well, Donald Trump is flooding the zone. Um, of everything that is happening, what worries me the most, what terrifies me the most, is the assault on the Voting Rights Act. I see the Voting Rights Act as the greatest achievement, legislative landmark in the history of our country. It is the law that fundamentally abolished Jim Crow in America, and led to, the second Reconstruction of America succeeded where the first failed. And it was largely on the strength of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And there's presently a case in the Supreme Court, it's Louisiana versus Calais, that raises questions about the constitutionality of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And if the Supreme Court strikes down Section 2 and allows, it would mean that Southern states could literally redistrict every Black congressional district out of existence. We would see the gravest collapse of minority representation since the failure of Reconstruction. And keep in mind, before the Voting Rights Act, most Southern states went at least 90 years without a single Black representative. So that's what terrifies me the most. And obviously, it has partisan implications. According to one analysis I saw, if Section 2 remains intact, then Democrats would need to win the popular vote by 1.4% in order to win back the House. But if Section 2 is struck down and Southern states redistrict, then we would have to win the popular vote by 5.4%. So the challenge of winning back the House becomes 4 times more complicated. The structural bias against House Democrats literally quadruples.
It's a scary thought.
And we're going to enter a world where it is possible for Republicans to win the presidency, the House, and the Senate without winning the popular vote for any of them. And if you care about a vital center within the Democratic Party, keep in mind that Black Democrats from the South are often moderating forces in the Democratic Party. And if you lose that moderating force, we're going to pay a heavy price.
You brought bringing up redistricting, gerrymandering. Obviously, that's a top issue right now in California. Prop 50 is on the ballot. What's your sort of take on this sort of battle that we're in, and what's the right answer? I mean, nobody likes gerrymandering,
Yeah.
but
Look, I have a general rule against gerrymandering, but if we're playing by the rules of good government and Republicans are cheating, then it's unilateral disarmament. So we have no choice but to redistrict to offset the effects of redistricting in states like Texas and Missouri and Utah and possibly Florida and Indiana and Ohio and Kansas. But we can actually offset the effects of those redistricting. It's the Section 2 that would create an almost insurmountable barrier. Not impossible, but it would create a high barrier to success.
when could that go into effect? I mean, what's the timeline on that?
It's hard to tell. If the court comes out with a decision in June, then it might be too late to allow the Republicans to redistrict. But if the court were to rush a decision in early 2026, then it could set off a wave of redistricting in the South. Yeah. No, I feel like it's the most consequential case in recent memory. It's
Like so many things, it's so hard to keep your
eh,
eye on the ball, right? Because you have you're just this flooding the zone, this fire hose that they're shooting out every day. Um, you mentioned something earlier just about the far left, the Democratic Party, and I know this is a sort of issue you're dealing with on a regular basis. I mean, you do not have a lot of fans on the far left of the Democratic Party, and at the same time,
This is news to me. I was not aware.
sorry, I did not mean to break
I
news. I
think no.
apologize. I told you I didn't want to
I
surprise
thought all the vandalism against my office was just a sign of love.
you. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, look, there's no. It's all about Israel. There's no issue in which I face more hate, harassment, and death threats than on the issue of Israel. I've had my office vandalized. There was an anti-Israel organization that, um, released a list of targets for demonstrations on October 7th, and I was among those list of targets. There's an organization known as the Bronx Anti-War Coalition that recently held a vigil for Sinwar. It's the level of hate out there is hard to describe. The level of anti-Semitism is hard to describe. I've had activists tell my mother that you're a genocide mother. You should have aborted your son. I've had colleagues tell me, Richie, I share your view, but why would I be as outspoken as you are, given the intensity of hatred and harassment that you have to face? It's just better to be silent.
And what's your answer to that? I mean, how do you push back?
I mean, if we're not willing to speak out on issues of basic decency and humanity and the morality, then what are we here for?
And I mean,
For me, silence is not amoral; it's immoral. You become complicit in the very evil against which you refuse to speak. I mean, that's how I view it.
yeah, I mean, you're not the poster child for who people would be thinking are on the front lines of the fight of this fight and supporting Israel. Although you've become that. Is it? Are there other issues that when it comes to you in relationship with the far left that you are sparring with?
I mean, I don't know if I'm actively. Um, I mean, I feel there have been moments when the progressive movement swung the pendulum too far to the left on public safety, on border security. And I do feel like we have to return to a rational center on those issues. Fiorello LaGuardia once said that there's no Democratic or Republican way to take out the trash. No one thinks of sanitation as Democratic or Republican. It's simply a core function of government, simply something that government does. And we should apply the same logic to public safety and border security. Like no party should have a monopoly on those core functions of government.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I've been a Democrat all my life, and I think most of the common sense issues, like you talked about, like whether it's immigration or safety, they feel to me as common sense. But it does feel like the Democratic Party has been hijacked a bit by a very small, loud, vocal group.
And in politics, intensity is destiny, and a visible vocal minority will often have outsized political power and more political power than a silent majority. And that's especially true in the age of social media, which amplifies visible vocal minorities.
Were you surprised that President Trump was able to negotiate a ceasefire deal?
No. As someone who's anti-Trump, I would say even a broken clock is right twice a day. And just like only Nixon could go to China, there's a sense in which only Trump could have brokered that ceasefire because he has a unique relationship with all the parties, with the Israeli government, with the Gulf states, and the very attributes of Donald Trump that Europeans find offensive are actually appealing to the leaders of the Gulf states. So I just felt like he commanded the right combination of love, fear, and respect from all the relevant parties in the ceasefire negotiations.
Yeah, it was hard to say in many ways, but he deserved the credit for that deal, and I think it's important that people give him the credit for that deal. I think it's you have to be honest with your opinions and your points of view, and you can't ignore things like that. We're about 8 days or so into the ceasefire. I know there's been, there's challenges already, which I guess is not surprising. Are you optimistic and hopeful? I mean, I know it's hopeful more. It's obviously the region is, it's a challenge. So,
Well, for one thing, I'm overwhelmingly grateful for the release of the living hostages. These past 2 years have been traumatic. The war has brought untold suffering. And, 2 years ago, Simchat Torah in Israel coincided with October 7th. So what should have been a day of joy became one of overwhelming grief and terror. And I feel there's a sense in which the release of the hostages represents a kind of restoration, represents the return of Simchat Torah as an occasion for celebration. So that's something for which I'm grateful. And I'm grateful for just the relief that it has brought to both Israel and the Jewish diaspora. But obviously, Hamas has wasted no time in violating the ceasefire. It continues to withhold the remains of about 16 deceased hostages, and we've seen Hamas execute Palestinians in cold blood and in broad daylight. And I have been struck by the conspicuous silence on college campuses. Where are the protests? Where are the encampments against the cold-blooded murder of Palestinians at the hands of Hamas? Which leads me to think that the animating principle of globalized the Intifada is not a love of the Palestinians. It's a hatred for Jews and Israelis.
Yeah, I don't think you should be, you should not hold your breath on that. And, as we saw for so many of the other conflicts happening worldwide that got zero attention over that same time, that's obviously is beyond upsetting and I guess shocking, but maybe not shocking, right? That there's no outcry.
Shocking, but not surprising.
I have a question that I'm going to take from the audience from Joseph Varrett, which is how can Democrats resolve the anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic horseshoeing of the far left wing of the party?
I think we should speak out against it, because silence is not neutrality, it's complicity. Like, when you're silent in the face of anti-Semitism, you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. You're part of the normalization of anti-Semitism. But we should be crystal clear, it's coming from both the far left and the far right. The anti-Semitism that I've seen from Candace Owens, from Tucker Carlson, who have massive platforms, has been shocking. I mean, we've seen Tucker Carlson platform a so-called historian who claims that the central villain of World War II is not Adolf Hitler, it is Winston Churchill. And then I saw him recently do an interview suggesting that the COVID vaccine was engineered so as to make Ashkenazi Jews immune. I mean, just the level of conspiratorial anti-Semitism on the far right is pretty deranged. And then, of course, we saw the young Republican chat. So I feel like we have to speak out against anti-Semitism on both sides. I mean, those on the left who only condemn anti-Semitism on the right, and those on the right who only condemn anti-Semitism on the left, are politicizing, are acting politically rather than acting morally and consistently.
Do you think there's a point where a tent can be too big? I mean, that's, one of the things that Democrats love to talk about is this big tent. And even, Ken Martin, when he came into, power as a DNC chair, got under a lot of attack or instantly for that kind of conversation and topic. What's your take on that?
Well, ultimately, I do not. I mean, who gets to decide the size of the tent, right? Like, it's not like there's one person. People speak of the Democratic establishment. Who's the Democratic establishment? Like, I want to meet this person. Like, who's the person or set of elites who gets to decide the size of the tent?
I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, I guess the question becomes, for you personally and for other Democrats, like, if someone's making statements, whatever it is, whether it's defund the police or, doesn't believe in a strong border or is making, anti-Semitic comments, do we say, that person, I don't believe that person is a Democrat, or do you not say that? Or do you say, how do I reach across the aisle or not across the aisle? I guess, how do I reach out to that person, understand where they're coming from better, and try and come to a common ground?
Look, the hope is that in the free marketplace of ideas and the competition of ideas, the truth will ultimately emerge. Well, that's the John Stuart Mill, Oliver Wendell Holmes, Louis Brandeis vision of free speech. Whether it holds true in the age of social media remains to be seen, but that's the vision that animates civil society in America. And so our challenge is to defend our ideas every bit as forcefully and frequently as the other side defends theirs. But if we remain silent, then we're ceding an advantage to the other side. And then in politics, look, civil discourse is important. I do feel like we have to lower the temperature. I think everyone engages in hyperbolic rhetoric that could incite political violence or raises the temperature. And I think we have to remind ourselves that the people with whom we disagree are not our enemies, they're our adversaries. And we should focus on attacking ideas rather than attacking people.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, I think it is critical. And I've said myself, I was, so vehemently opposed to Trump. If someone said to me that they were voting for Trump or considering Trump or supported Trump, I just sort of instantly shut them off. And that was my mistake. I think in a what makes America so special is this idea that so many different types of people live here with so many different points of view. And it's all about understanding where someone's coming from and why they're coming from there, and getting under the hood and having a dialogue or a conversation. And it can be very tough at times.
Far too often politics becomes, I feel like politics has become religiosity without religion. Like there are those who say, if you disagree with me, you're not merely wrong, but you're evil. And you should be burned at the stake for heresy. And I feel like that kind of dogmatism, that kind of fundamentalism is incompatible with the spirit of politics in a pluralistic democracy. Like the reality is we are a multiracial, multi-ethnic, ideologically varied democracy, a continental democracy, wide range of viewpoints. And we all have to figure out how to coexist despite our differences of opinion on strongly felt issues.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. How did you respond to somebody who said to you, I'm a Trump voter because I'm a single issue voter on Israel?
It's not obviously I strongly oppose Trump, but it's not my place to tell a voter, the issues on which you should vote. Like for a long time, there was, and maybe this was unfair to Thomas Frank, but there was certainly a caricature of Thomas Frank, claiming that the American people are foolish because they vote against their own economic interest. Even if that were true, that's not, like, if you choose to vote on your values rather than your economic interests, that's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. Like, you as a voter decide the basis on which you vote, whether it's your interests, whether it's your values, whether it's a combination of the two, whether it's on one issue or multiple issues. Like, that is your decision as a voter, and it's not my place to I might disagree with the factual assumptions that underlie your voting decisions. Like if we can debate, I can make a factual argument against the notion that Donald Trump is the best for Israel, the best for the economy, but I'm not going to tell you that what your priority should be as a voter. That's just my personal view. I mean, if whether it's Israel or the economy or public safety, like that's a personal decision.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, I think back to kind of this concept of what it means to be American. I think it becomes challenging to be a single issue voter. I mean, I think in some ways, I think that's what is such a critical part of being an American. I mean, you highlighted a quote that I talk about all the time in a podcast I was listening to, which is the Bill Clinton quote, right? There's nothing wrong with America that cannot be cured with what's right with America. And I think it's critical that we always remember that. And we remember how big this country is with how many different viewpoints and how we have to figure out ways to come together. And when you have people who are so dogmatic and it's just one issue, and that's what's just making the decisions for them. It makes it challenging.
Right, but there are people for whom it's not simply one issue, right? There are people for whom Israel is central to their identity. And if people feel like you're delegitimizing and demonizing a fundamental part of their identity, they have a right to object to that.
Yeah. No, I think it's a valid, I think it's a really important way to think about things.
Like if you're a candidate who denigrate, I happen to be Puerto Rican. I care about Puerto Rico. If you're a candidate who demonizes and denigrates Puerto Rico, I'm going to have a problem with you, even if I agree with you on every other issue. It strikes, that's why, you and I'm not, this is obviously not true for every Jewish voter, right? Right. Everyone has their own conception of their Jewish identity or any identity, right? But to many of the Jews to whom I've spoken, for them, Israel's not a foreign policy issue. It's something that's deeply personal. It's something that strikes close to home. And when you are advocating the destruction of the world's largest Jewish population in the world, that is experienced, understandably, as a personal attack.
Yeah, that's well said. Thank you. So let's start briefly at the beginning. Can you just tell us a little bit about where you were born and raised?
Sure, I was born and raised in the Bronx. You described me as one of a kind, which is technically false because I'm a twin. So my brother and I are 5 minutes apart. He is biologically older, but temperamentally younger. And actually, just a quick story. When my mother was watching the movie La Bamba in 1986 or 1987, she felt inspired to name me after Ritchie Valens. Hence, my name is Ritchie with a T, which is a unique spelling. And she named my brother after the Reuben sandwich, from which I infer that I'm clearly the favorite son. But I'm technically not one of a kind. But the Bronx has been the only home I've ever known. Born and raised, spent my childhood in poverty, raised by my hero, my mother, who had to bring up 3 children on minimum wage, which in the 1990s was $4.25 an hour. So I tell people, imagine being a single mother in the most expensive city in America, raising 3 children on $4.25 an hour. And when I won the Democratic primary in 2020, when I knew I was about to become a United States congressman, I publicly said that before I'm a congressman or a councilman, I'm first and foremost the son of my mother, Deborah Bachelet. And for me, there's no greater honor than representing the Bronx, which is full of powerful mothers like mine who have struggled and sacrificed and suffered so that their children and grandchildren can have a fighting chance at the American dream. Probably the most formative experience of my life was growing up in public housing. So public housing in New York City is owned and operated by the government, and it's been so chronically underfunded that it has a capital need of $80 billion and counting. And so I grew up in conditions of mold and mildew and leaks and lead without consistent heat and hot water in the winter. There are stories of asthmatics who are struggling to breathe in the face of molded and leaking conditions. There are senior citizens who have no heat and hot water in the winter because their boilers are breaking down. And so the central mission of my life has been to advocate for poor people in public housing. And at age 24, I took the leap of faith and ran for public office. Had no deep pockets, no ties to the party machine in Bronx politics. But I spent a whole year doing nothing but knocking on doors. I went into people's homes. I heard their stories. People saw in my youth a new generation of leadership. And in a race of about 10 candidates, I won my first campaign on the strength of door-to-door, face-to-face campaigning, became the first openly LGBTQ elected official from the Bronx. What's unusual about my story is a few years before then, I was at the lowest point of my life. I had dropped out of college, found myself struggling with depression, abusing substances, even thought of taking my own life because I felt as if the world around me had collapsed. And so I never thought in my wildest dreams, with the unconditional love of my mother, that I would rebuild my life in a few years, become the youngest elected official in America's largest city, and then ultimately become a member of the United States Congress. And so the lesson learned from my life is even in your moment of greatest hardship, never lose hope. There's no telling where life will take you. And my life has been a journey from public housing in the Bronx to the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C.
Well, you did push back on being one of a kind, but your story is extraordinary, and what you've been through and what you've accomplished and where you are is just, I think, you are beyond a role model for all. Your mother is extraordinary. La Bamba is one of the movies I've seen more. I saw more in the theater than any other movie. So your mother and I have that in common. So I'm on the same page with her there.
Yeah. I once shared that story with Chuck Schumer, and he proceeded to sing Donna. So that's
That's so.
that movie inspires nostalgia.
And also, although I am a proud Angelino now, technically you were you would have been my congressman when I was a student at Fieldston.
I once spoke to a young kid who said, I had a tough upbringing. I went to school in the Bronx, and I said, where did you go? He said Fieldston. I'm like, that's not quite the stereotypical Bronx experience, but who am I to judge? So.
I've spent my life going back and forth between saying I went to school in the Bronx and went to school in Fieldston, because it is honest to say you were in the Bronx, but it definitely has a slightly different connotation. Going through a little bit more of your background, what was your first job you had?
God, I think it was politics. Although it was not a job, I was part of a exploring leadership program. No, apart from errands that I did for which I received money, probably my first like a systematic work experience was an internship, a paid internship in the deputy mayor's office for economic development and rebuilding. So that was under Dan Doctoroff in the Bloomberg administration, and it was through the Cora program. So that was my first introduction to politics.
Wow, that's great. If you weren't in politics today, where do you think you would be?
I feel like I would either be a teacher. Like I love teaching. I love speaking. I love educating, taking complex issues and explaining them in terms that are understandable. Like I enjoy that educational challenge, and there's a sense in which I feel public figures are supposed to be educators. And then when I was in high school, I was the captain of the law team. And so we won the citywide moot court competition 2 years in a row, defeating Bronx Science and Brooklyn Tech and Stuyvesant. And so there's an alternate world where I would have been a lawyer, just arguing cases before appellate courts.
That makes a lot of sense. What's one skill we'd be surprised to know that you have?
A skill that would be, when I was a kid, I did an impersonation of The Rock. I was a massive professional wrestling fan and did a pretty effective impersonation of The Rock, a skill that has since atrophied.
All right, I'm not going to ask you to do it again now, but I feel like you should work. I feel like you should get back on that one.
Yeah.
Where do you get most of your news in the morning? What are your number one news sources?
I try to read everything. Obviously, the New York Times and the Daily. I'll read The Economist, which I consider to be broadly informative. And I will look to social media as a source of information, and I often use AI to fact check the information that I encounter on social media. And then I'll read reports from think tanks, including from the Congressional Research Service, which is, particularly useful to me as a member of Congress. So I feel like, every publication, every media outlet has its bias. And if you read everything, it balances out.
Right. I think that's well said. What's the most used app on your phone?
ChatGPT, probably. I'm now using ChatGPT to count calories.
Wow.
I've lost 15 pounds because of ChatGPT. So yeah. I take a screenshot of something I'm eating, and it will estimate the number of calories. And so I could tell you the number of calories and carbs and fats, and I've become obsessed with it.
Wow. All right. I might start doing that too. What's your most amused emoji?
I'm not big on emojis. I just
Do you have a campaign theme song that you use?
Baby La Bamba.
Okay.
That it would be the most fitting. So.
If you were doing a last meal, it can be from various restaurants, not just your mom's home cooking. Where would you be pulling some of those meals from?
I have a friend. He and his wife take my mother and me to Peter Luger's every year, and I do enjoy the experience. I love the steak, but I just love the whole experience. The waiters are excellent. So I don't know if that would be my final meal, but it certainly would be up. It would be a pot one of the options.
I would say I don't know if there's a right answer to that question, but if there is, that's it.
Yeah.
Um, um, who would be three of your top dream dinner party guests, not family members?
You might have stumped me. Let me think. I have to think about that because I
You
don't.
can you can you can
Yeah.
pass on that one. Who are some of your political role models?
Obviously, he had a failed foreign policy, but I have great admiration for the domestic policy of Lyndon Johnson. Um, I feel like there are a few presidents who transformed America as much as Lyndon Johnson, both as the master of the Senate and ultimately the president. And what I find inspiring about his story is he entered the House of Representatives as a member of the segregationist bloc, and then left the presidency as the greatest champion of civil rights in the history of the United States. And so I feel it's a powerful story of redemption. And when he signed into law the Voting Rights Act, he famously said that we might lose the South for a generation. And so the decision to put historical legacy above political expedience is one that I admire. And I thought Ted Kennedy was just one of the greatest legislators of his generation, the kind of pragmatic progressivism that serves as a model for me.
I think those are great answers and great reason on Lyndon Johnson. What's your ideal day off? I know you don't get one as a politician, but if you
Yeah.
did take one, what would it be?
I never vacate. The only context in which I travel abroad is Codel's congressional delegations. A few months ago, I went to Italy and Rome for the first time and had an opportunity to meet the Pope. And Rome is just one of the most gorgeous cities I've ever seen. I mean, there's literally an iconic structure in every corner. I was born Catholic, so it was particularly poignant to meet the Pope and then go to St. Peter's Basilica, which may be one of the most gorgeous places of worship I've ever seen. Apparently, if it were built today, it would cost upward of $30 billion. And it took more than a century to construct. And Rome is at the intersection of Catholic civilization and Western civilization and Roman civilization. I saw, remnants of the Colosseum. It was an amazing experience. And I was able to buy a cross for my mother and have the Pope bless it and give it to my mother as a gift.
Wow, that must have been very special. Do you have a chance to watch a TV show these days?
I might watch when I was in high school. One of my favorite show was House MD or Law and Order. So every so often I'll watch an episode of Law and Order just as a form of nostalgia.
Right, love that. What's the last movie you watched besides obviously my movie Roof Man, which I know you went to the theaters recently and went to go see. So we're gonna go past that.
I don't remember the last thing I saw on Netflix was actually a documentary on Vince McMahon. I saw it a year after it came out, but I thought it was exceptional. I was, as I said earlier, I was a massive professional wrestling fan, and I thought it was an excellent documentary. And as I was watching the documentary, it struck me that in many ways, Donald Trump is the Vince McMahon of American politics. Like Donald Trump did to politics what Vince McMahon did to wrestling. He transformed it into a form of entertainment.
What's the number one New York food that you would defend against anybody?
New York pizza is far better than Chicago pizza.
Again, very well said.
Sorry.
You're not going to offend me on that one. Before you go, I would love to just leave us with, why do you think today people should believe in the Democratic Party? What's you're running for office right now? I mean, obviously local issues are critical, but from a practical standpoint, why do you think people should believe in the Democratic Party?
I mean, I look, I I would not be where I am today were it not for the social safety net, were it not for public schools, public transit, public housing, programs like Medicaid. Like these are not abstractions to me. These are social contracts that enabled me to become the best version of myself. And I fundamentally believe that there's one party in America that is committed to defending the social contract that gives everyone a fighting chance at a decent life. And the other party is largely content to dismantle the social safety. I mean, that to me is the fundamental difference. And so that's why, those are the values that lead me to unwaveringly support the Democratic Party, and I proudly identify myself as a Democrat. I mean, I represent the poorest congressional district in America. Um, Jacob Riis wrote a book, How the Other Half Lives. I represent the other half, which historically has felt forgotten and failed by the whole political establishment. But the one party that is at least trying to fight for them is the Democratic Party.
I thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's such a pleasure to meet you and get a chance to talk to you. I want to come see you in the Bronx, not in Fieldston, in the Bronx.
They're great. Zero to Nove has great pasta. So
We'll catch a meal.
One of my final meals if I were to.
We'll watch La Bamba. I can't wait. I'm going to put a link in the chat of people to support Ritchie, and it's really a pleasure, and I look forward to meet you in person soon. Thanks
Take care.
Okay, bye everybody.